Katana Longsword Hybrid. I'm super into it. I think this is a really, really cool. I'm actually probably going to keep it in this configuration going forward. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Screen Tested. Today we are back with longswords and katanas. However, these aren't going head to head as they have in previous episodes. What we're going to be doing is taking some of the best features of the longsword and actually applying them to the katana to create a unholy hybrid, if you will. So this all started because obviously we have done an episode comparing something like a regular longsword to a regular katana. What are the pros, what are the cons, what are the benefits, and what are the best features about each blades. And there are some drawbacks with a katana, especially in this sort of matchup. And a lot of people, as a result, obviously ask the question, well, what would happen if you applied some of those positive features from the longsword to the katana? So what we're going to be doing in today's episode specifically is taking something like the suba, which is the disc guard, which provides a very, I would say, low level amount of hand protection, and adding a cross guard to it. So we'll have the benefits of the disc guard itself with the benefits, hopefully, of the cross guard from something like a longsword. Additionally, we're going to be adding a pommel to the end of the katana. Reason being, this should change the weight distribution and balance, and hopefully will make it feel a little bit lighter and nimbler in the hand. So those are kind of the two biggest dynamic changes that we're going to have with our katana longsword hybrid. So with that being said, let's actually get to the build itself, because we need to essentially mash all of these parts together. Let's get started. So getting started with our katana longsword hybrid was honestly a lot more complex than you first might think. Now, making subas by hand from scratch is something that I've done before. I did it with this exact one here, and it turned out really, really well. I'm really happy with it. However, it's a lot of work. And in this particular case, I got reached out to by Makera. They make desktop CNC machines, and they wanted to send me their new Z1. And I have been waiting pretty much all my life to get my hands on a CNC machine, and so I was more than happy to take a look at it. However, there is a little bit of context here I should mention, and that is while I do have a lot of experience in things like 3D modeling and hand machining, I've been doing those things for literally years, both in a professional type setting. I've made things for manufacture, I've made products, that sort of stuff. I've never done the actual CNC part, so I had to learn this from scratch. Now, I want to make this clear, this is not sponsored by them. They didn't pay me any money, so I can say whatever I want about this machine. Now, I get some people might not want to hear about my escapades in learning a brand new kind of skill from scratch, so there'll be a time code right here if you want to jump straight to the suba portion, right, when we get into the heavy modifications. Now, this is a desktop CNC. That's what it's being billed as. It's around about, I think, $1,000 or something like that, which is fucking wild. And if any of you guys know anything about CNC machines, that's absolutely insane. Like, you can get 3D printers for that price. Anyway, moving on. But actually unboxing the machine and getting out all the parts, it basically comes ready to go. Once you get all the boxes and bits of packing out, you can basically just turn the machine on and it's good. It's ready to go. It comes basically set up. You just obviously got to put tools and stuff like that in it. The first issue that I actually run into was obviously getting the programs ready, because that's where the difficulty in this process actually begun for me. Because these sorts of programs, I had to download two of them. One is obviously to program all of the different tools, the tool paths, basically creating the code to be able to CNC something. And then the other program is actually to send it to the machine itself so the machine can, get the programming essentially. Now, when it came to the actual CNC part, I decided, because I am me, of course, instead of starting off with something very, very simple, very, very easy, I decided to jump headfirst and drown. And I'm like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna do a really complex, hard medallion out of aluminum. That's what I'm gonna start with. Never done this before, that's what I'm gonna start with. And it was all going pretty well until it wasn't. It's midnight. I'm going to bed. I can't fix this. It's not even close to anything. Funnily enough, even at this point where I feel like I'm at a point where I can kind of do what I want with the machine, I still don't know what this error was. Essentially, the tool wouldn't even make contact with anything, just had an error. So the first thing I tried to CNC was a failure. it didn't work. So I decided to try some other things, and that was really trying to do some engraving, right? Let's try and get some successful things under our belt before we try and obviously work our way up to the suba itself. So I did some things like obviously logos on plastics and woods, and they worked reasonably well. I decided, all right, let's try and get back to the metal stuff. Let's try and do some more complex 3D CNCing, right? And the first one I did was a failure. Not because any of my tool paths were wrong or I got anything wrong, it was just I did it first thing in the morning and I woke up and I set my depth kind of wrong, and so that one ended up being a failure, of course. So then I decided to try again, this time with some different things like keychains and logos, and this was the first time that I actually got a successful program ran. Now I want to make this clear, this had nothing to do with the machine. All of these failures were my f-ups. I was making very small mistakes, setting my depths kind of just a little bit wrong, you know, and this is kind of where the first lessons I learned was, and that is, this isn't like other consumer grade, ready to go type products, kind of machines, I would say. This one you have to be incredibly attentive. You have to understand what you're doing, understanding what the point of each different, you know, kind of tool path is, what you're trying to do with each tool before you're able to essentially have a success. So with this one and only successful CNC'd part, I decided it was time to obviously jump up to the suba itself. This was a little bit of a learning process as well. This has all been a learning process. Essentially, I created 3 separate tool paths and 1 contouring cut. The first tool path is obviously just the largest bit to remove as much material as possible. The second one is to try and get a lot closer to our final dimensions. And then the last one is obviously a finishing pass with a much more finer and smaller bit, right? And then the last and final cut is essentially just to cut the part out of the raw material itself. I kind of made some mistakes here as well and didn't run the final finishing pass. The reason why I didn't is because this already took way too long. This was like 20 hours, and this part should not take that long. But essentially I finished out the suba after only 2 passes, that being the roughing pass and then one that's a little bit closer. Now it is very close to the final part. It just doesn't look as nice and as finished as I would have obviously liked it to be, but if I had ran that final pass, it would have been like 40 hours. It was insane. So I just decided, because I'm gonna have to finish this by hand anyway, we're obviously got to add the crossguard to it itself, I might as well just do it by hand and obviously move on. Now I want to make this clear, if you're really good at CNC programming, you can probably get this 99% done straight out of the machine. I can't do that, and because I'm gonna have to finish it by hand anyway, this just added an extra 5 minutes onto it. Not a really big deal. But now that we obviously have a custom suba that has obviously, you know, my maker's mark, my logo on it, now we can actually take this over and start finishing it off. Like I said, I didn't get that last pass in, so I'm doing a lot of, you know, kind of, I would say, a little intricate bit just with the Dremel tool. Then I'm going to cut out the suba from the raw stock, take it over to the belt sander and finish a lot of those edges before starting to sand it and polish it. Then what we can do is actually grab some old cross guards made out of brass, so the same material as our suba, of course. These ones here were actually taken from the twin blade project. I just cut them off obviously when it got recycled. We can then obviously take the suba and the 2 bits of the cross guard and start heating them up with some blow torches and solder them onto it. Now obviously this is a prototype. This whole sword is a prototype. It's not actually made to, you know, go and fight with, at least not at this point, right? But it should be definitely strong enough for us to get a good idea of how this thing is going to work. At least I hope it will. After we've got 2 arms of the cross guard attached to our suba, we can then obviously polish it up and give it a little bit of a sand so it looks all nice and consistent. The next thing we can do is start fitting it to our blade. Now the blade that I'm going to be using for this prototype, you know, kind of concept katana, I guess, is the one that you guys have seen me use a bunch of times before. I usually use it when I'm testing something dumb. It's the same one I use for like the Darksaber project and that sort of thing. We're going to fit our crossguard suba combination to it. I then CNC'd this spacer. It's a lot thicker than the regular katana spacers, so obviously it should help us fit everything together a little bit more. Then I got this $30 handle. Like, this is not a proper katana handle. Like, it looks real, right? But it doesn't have real ray skin like this one. It doesn't have a proper cord wrap. It's just like some cheap one that I got. Because obviously I drilled a hole into the end of it to attach a pommel to it, a brass pommel, so everything matches, of course. But with that being being said, all that's really left with our longsword katana hybrid, just drilling some holes through the handle into the katana itself and putting in some bamboo pins so that it obviously is, you know, one solid piece. With that being said, let's get out there and let's see how this abomination performs. Is it any good? So here is our abomination, a cross between a longsword and a katana. Then we have our pommel attached to our standard katana handle. I'm not gonna lie, I kinda like it. I don't know, on camera, this looks pretty nifty. It's very, I'm gonna use the word elegant. That's the word I'm gonna use. And I think it looks good, actually. I'm actually really surprised about this. But I'm very, very happy with how it turned out. Obviously, it's not as perfect as it should be because, you know, this is my first time learning a new skill, as it were, like I mentioned before. But overall, really, really happy with it. All right, so the big question that everybody's got on their mind, does it still function like a regular katana? The answer to that is, of course, yes. Like, we haven't really changed all that much. I mean, doing draw cuts, still 100% practical. It still handles like a regular katana, but the weight distribution, how does that feel? This is where it gets interesting. Let's talk about the weight distribution of regular katanas, right? Because they usually don't have, you know, pommels, right? A counterweight to counteract the mass of the blade. They do feel, I would say, in the hand a little bit forward heavy. Now, when I say forward heavy, that doesn't mean not refined and not quick and nimble. It just means that the weight distribution is obviously around about here because they don't really have anything back here to, you know, kind of kick it back a bit. It's just wood with some bamboo, you have your tang, and usually nothing else. When you put a pommel on it, all of a sudden, the weight distribution becomes, how do I describe this? It doesn't necessarily feel like a regular longsword. That's not how it feels. So I would say it actually feels a little bit more like, wow, that feels good though. That does feel good. The point of balance has moved like 2 inches from the guard, 1.5 inches. I do like it. Okay, I'm trying to figure out what it feels like so that I could explain it to you guys. The truth is, it's kind of unique. Let's start with a draw cut, something that you guys know that I have done a lot of. One of my favorite things to do with katanas. I mean, yeah. Feels pretty good to me. I like it. Yeah, I like that. That's nice. If you're enjoying today's episode, you should consider subscribing. I would truly appreciate it. You'll get more riveting content like me in a disgusting pond water in full armor. Shit, nearly slipped there. Yeah, subscribe. So here we have our obviously crossguard suba combination, and then we have something like a regular crossguard. Now, how big is this one? Obviously it depends how long you actually just make the arms of the crossguard, right? But this one is, I would say, just a touch smaller than something like than I would like, right? This is the standard length, I would say, very stereotypical. This one is just a touch smaller because of the crossguard that I was working with to begin with, which was a little bit smaller, as you guys saw, right? But in terms of the coverage of the hand, this is the difference that we have now. Obviously, with that extra suba protection, it means we have a lot more coverage over the front of our hands. We don't have a lot of protection down the sides of our hands, but obviously when we're using our blade to engage it, we simply just turn it and then it engages it. But this one obviously does have a lot more passive protection now, because we have obviously the sides of our hands protected, which means if for some reason, now I've never experienced this, I would have to imagine that maybe somebody has, of course, right? But I have never personally had a situation where I have not been able to engage my crossguard in time. It's literally like a fine motor movement of literally this, right? It's very easy to engage, but I imagine that perhaps it has happened before. So having like that passive protection there with the suba integration, I think is good. I have no complaints with that. Like in terms of weight, it doesn't really add too much to it. And we do have examples on European blades of something very similar to this, perhaps not exactly the same, but rings and crossguard combination on something like on my Zweihander, right? It has beautiful rings on it with a crossguard. It's very, very similar to this sort of setup. It's almost identical. The only difference is obviously with a suba, it's concentric to the blade, whereas rings usually are offset. They're more like ovals that extend from the crossguard or the center of the blade, where this one obviously is in dead center of it, right? But obviously comparing these two, very, very similar, same sort of protection now, which I really, really like, because it fixes one of the biggest gripes that I had with the katana, that being obviously the suba is fine enough to stop your hand slipping onto the blade, and it's fine enough as like a last defense in terms of hand protection, but obviously adding something a little bit extra like this that allows for a lot more coverage and a lot more offensive capabilities, I'm really, really happy with, because obviously crossguards can be used offensively as well. So that's awesome. I really like this, is what I'm saying. Let's two-hand this sucker. Wow. In two hands is where that makes such a difference, because if you look at the length of a katana, right, they're actually not super long, and additionally, usually, not all the time, the handles aren't super long either. Now adding an extra, I would say like an inch, right, inch and a half at the end here to get even further down on it does make a huge difference, because obviously you have more leverage now. Additionally, because we have that extra length and the blade is so short, altogether in two hands, this thing becomes crazy. Yeah, like I really, really dig it. I really like that. So the one thing that I did want to show off very quickly was the difference in quality between this suba and this suba here. Now, one of the big things that I think I've learned with this project, right, was that this one is a three-dimensional kind of file, right? This was actually a 3D model, so it has kind of different layers to it. And because of that, when you're using the machine, when you're using the Makera, right, it means that it actually wants to get a whole bunch of little right angles in all of these little tiny areas. And I think this is where I was actually running into some issue, because if you look at this particular suba here, right, ease of use, this was nowhere near as long as the other one. The other one took a very, very long time. I had to swap out a whole bunch of different tools. With this particular suba, right, you only needed one tool, which was the chamfer, and I only needed to do a 2D kind of path, very similar to what I was doing with like the name tags, how one of the name tags I did a three-dimensional one for it, and it took hours. When I did another one, it took half an hour, and the quality is very similar between them. So how I approach these sorts of projects now is very, very different, and I have to decide whether or not is something worth doing it in 3D, having to change a whole bunch of tools, versus doing something like this, which is only kind of like a two-dimensional graphic, much easier, much better quality. So what do we think of our Katana longsword hybrid abomination? Truthfully, I actually really like this. I like this a lot more than I thought I would. I'll get into the CNC aspect just before we finish out, but let's talk a little bit about some of the dynamics here, right? We have, in my opinion, I think this is better than a standard katana. We have more hand protection in terms of the weight distribution, a little bit of a personal preference here, but I actually really like how this has kind of come out. It's kind of a mix between both. Super into that. I think the only way that you could make this even better is just to make the blade longer, right? If we came out to here, you know, a good, 5-10 inches extra, this thing would be sick, man. I'm really happy with it, and I'm really happy with this project. Now, I do want to say a big thank you to Makera, right? They're the one who sent the Z1. And obviously, like I said before, I have made subas before by hand. They are a huge pain in the ass. Making this complex of a suba, obviously, and it's my, my logo, my maker's mark, is incredible. Like, I'm really, really happy with this. And you guys will be seeing this machine used in upcoming projects because essentially the possibilities are endless at this point. Now, like I mentioned, there are some, interesting dynamics about, how user-friendly is it, especially for somebody who's beginning out, right? But in terms of the machine itself, it is incredible. If you guys are interested, I will leave links down below. Do I recommend it? Well, I mean, I've had no problems with it so far. I've been really, really enjoying it. And I do think, this is exciting to me. Like, this is actually something that I find exciting because now we're in a realm where we can get $1,000 CNC machines. And what that means is in the coming years, I do think that we actually might get to a point where desktop CNC work is going to literally be just as easy and as simple as using something like a 3D printer. I don't necessarily think we're there yet, especially on the software side, right? But man, we are close. And that is really exciting. Katana Longsword HYBRID, I'm super into it. I think this is a really, really cool. I'm actually probably gonna keep it in this configuration going forward because I just like it so much. This thing's cool. But additionally, I'm very happy with how we actually got to this point and this particular project. I really enjoyed it. This was a fun one, and I hope you guys enjoy it also. I'm sure there'll be plenty of comments, and I can't wait to read through them because did we upgrade the katana? In my opinion, yes. This thing is fucking sick. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. If you want to check out Makera and the Z1 machine, there'll be links down below. Like I said, I really liked it. All right, with that being said, I'll see you next week in another episode. Have a good one.